The original Ark Survival Evolved has never been an especially fast game when it comes to performance, and the original 2018 version of the game on Switch is one of the worst ports I've ever tested. This port is plagued by image quality issues and low performance, and I spelled all this out in my original video covering it. But just a few months ago, we were contacted by a gentleman representing the game. They had big news and wanted to share. Turns out, Ark was about to receive a brand new port to the Switch to make up for that original subpar release. I had an opportunity to check out this new version early and speak with the porting team, and walked away impressed with what was achieved. Thus today, alongside my good friend and colleague Alex Battaglia, we're here to talk about this new version of Ark.
Hey John, this reminds me a lot of Zone of the Enders from back in the day, which got remade and reported after a kind of disastrous first release. And seeing this happen in the video game industry is very rare, so we definitely have to cover it today.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Like, to actually go back and completely rebuild a game using a new developer, no less, it is rare. And it's for that reason that I felt it was, our duty, I suppose, to cover it, considering that they referenced our original video as like a highlight reel of what they did not want to do again. And that's exactly the case. So the thing, though, that's weird about this one is that the developer of this new version of Ark is none other than Grove Street Games. Yes, the same development studio behind the not so well received Grand Theft Auto trilogy.
Yes.
But this time, I would say they've done a good job to the point where Ark on Switch actually looks like a good game now. Like, visually speaking, it's actually like a gosh darn nice looking video game.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things. You were showing screenshots to me and you're putting them side by side with the original release, with some of the footage you have from that. And the difference is that the newer version of the game, yes, obviously it will have a number of compromises to make it run on Switch in the first place that we'll talk about very shortly, but it actually looks like a modern game. The original release from how many years ago was now? Oh my gosh, it was one of the first videos you did, John, while I just was hired, I think, at DF at the time.
Oh, yeah.
So it's quite a while ago. That just didn't even look like a modern release or even a modern Switch release.
No.
It was just the textures, the draw distance. It was honestly like something like from like the way it looked visually, like something from like 1998 to 2000 in terms of like the visual feature set on display.
It's kind of worse though, because when you add in that low resolution, and this was like getting into like the 240p range at times,
goodness.
And the TAA and just everything, it was just a smeary mess.
It was awful.
So in building this new port, the first thing Grove Street Games did is they actually started from a new base. So they're actually working from the Xbox code base from roughly 1 year ago.
Mm-hmm.
It's a completely new conversion. Nothing is used from the prior Switch release. And I should note that I don't have that many comparisons here because, unfortunately, by the time I started working on this, the old version has been replaced.
Yeah.
So I could not even access it, sadly. But we have some leftover footage here for those comparisons. They actually updated this one. It's using Unreal Engine 4 4.26.
Yeah.
So it's like, what was it, like second to last release?
Last release. I think 4.27 is the last release of Unreal
Right.
Engine 4. So yeah, it's very, very new. And at this point in time, like, you have to think about it, that Unreal Engine 4, when this game originally came out, wasn't so popular for Switch releases. So this is one of the earlier Unreal Engine 4 releases at all. And since then, we've seen a lot more successful Unreal Engine 4 titles there. So I think there's probably some engine stuff that's happening, as well as some just general learnings,
And one of those learnings applies to image quality, because now this version uses Unreal's TAAU, so temporal anti-aliasing with upsampling, which helps a lot. But the actual base target resolutions, they're aiming for 1080p in docked and 720p in portable mode. But obviously, it doesn't, fully get there, and the minimum scale is 55% per axis.
Okay.
So it can go down to, it's like in docked mode, it's above 540p, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, that's reasonable, though, for Switch, right?
Exactly. And then when you combine that with the TAAU, it actually looks pretty sharp. I would say on average it's around the 70% mark from what I can tell, which is not too bad. And it actually does look dramatically sharper, which is cool.
Yeah, that 70% axis scale with TAAU that I've covered on the past on PC, I've said usually around you want to be above 70% for it to start looking like the real deal. So that's actually not bad image quality then.
Yeah, it's definitely good. But obviously, the thing about Ark, though, is it's a huge game. The maps are gigantic. And it was never really that well optimized on prior consoles either. I mean, we have looks at the Xbox One version, like, running very poorly. So,
Yeah.
you know, getting this on Switch at all is a big deal. But some of the optimizations they made are really key to that. So one of the things they changed the way they handle textures. So they're using Unreal's runtime virtual texturing, which is really good for large areas because you can kind of cache the shader data, right? And it's a good fit for these huge open landscapes, which Ark has all over the place. They're also using the adaptable scalable texture compression. So they're basically decreasing texture size to about 2/3 of the original texture size. And these two things here are one of the key reasons that they're able to get the loading times down, among others as well. But the loading times, that was one of the biggest complaints I had with the original. If you recall in that video, I infamously played a game of Contra 3 on the Super NES while waiting for Ark to load.
Yeah.
And it takes minutes. Here, well, it's significantly faster.
Yeah, that I remember that, and you memeing at it almost. It was so funny, as well as the opening reel of the video. No one can forget that as well too.
Exactly. And also, there was the bad stuttering too. It wasn't just loading times. Even once you get into the game, it would often stutter and kind of like hitch up real bad.
Yeah, and the stuff about texturing, you're talking about virtual texturing. It's one of the reasons why. Like things like idTech use it nowadays. Unreal Engine 5 is now using virtual texturing. It's one of those ways to keep texture quality close to the camera relatively high while lowering the footprint of textures in general. Because you're just doing it in a less dumb way. You're streaming in textures more often. And I think that's one of the reasons, the texture quality is one of the reasons why this game now actually kind of looks like a real game, unlike before. Like, if you just do the side-by-sides, my goodness, not even just the resolution, the quality of the textures that you're seeing usually is just awful. Like, didn't most of them just never load in the original version?
A lot of them just didn't load or, they weren't, it was... Whew, I mean, it's bad, but now, I mean, it really does look so much better, especially this second island here that I was testing, the deserty landscapes. You've got like the nice light bounce from the sun, and it's just a really surprisingly beautiful environment.
Yeah,
which is cool.
Let's talk about some of the kind of graphical stuff, because one thing that we've always complained about in open world games before, Halo Infinite included, is that
yes.
shadows in the distance are not covered at all. And here, based upon what you've seen and what the developers have told you, they're actually using the Unreal Engine 4 feature for SDF shadows for the distance.
Yeah.
And this is really good because like games, especially ones on the Switch, you can't really be drawing shadow maps out that far. Just in general, it's like a draw issue. No. It's a rasterization issue. But here with SDF shadows, you still get some of that distance shadowing, and the game, as a result, doesn't just kind of turn into mud, single colored mud at the distance, which is some issue I have with a ton of open world games. But the fact that they even fixed it on Switch here is pretty impressive.
Yeah, and also general shadow maps that are near the player are also improved dramatically. Like in the original release, you would just have these weird blob shadows that really didn't sort of match anything in the environment. And now it actually looks correct, as you would expect. They also, and this is a huge one, the LOD stuff has been fixed. So again, in that original port, trees and objects would just turn into these weird ultra low res mushy objects, like just right near the player. It looked terrible. Trees would be floating in midair. There was nothing. It was really, really bad. And obviously, as you can see now, it actually looks much more like the other console versions of the game, where you can see plenty of detail. The trees are fully implemented and represented visually. They're not just like this floating blobs of texture. It makes a big difference, I think. It's really impressive.
Yeah. And one thing I've been noticing in the footage you showed me is they also updated the UI for this. So the last time I played Ark, it was very PC UI. It was like inventory management with like a mouse and a keyboard, like very much so mouse driven, it seemed like. What is it like here? Well,
so they actually did sort of, it does actually use kind of a more PC-like feel, but it's a lot more intuitive for a console now. They added in essentially the Destiny-style cursor and sort of better organization of the menus, and just it actually kind of works while still allowing all the flexibility of Ark. Because I mean, I'm not a huge Ark fan.
We know.
I'll be honest. We're looking at this for the tech only, right?
Yeah.
And so but it is cool to be able to customize all these sliders. Like whenever I start a new game, the first thing I do is increase the poop frequency slider to the max. That is the most important thing, and you can do that on Switch. So thankfully, it's no problem. So that's good. But yeah, so that's kind of just like a very quick summary of some of the changes that they've done here. But the key is that visually, it actually looks like Ark. The interface is superior. The loading times are faster. It's actually a nice looking Unreal game now. It's one of the better looking ones I've seen on Switch, especially considering the size of the world.
Yeah.
But obviously, we do have to talk performance.
Yes.
And when we get to performance, the thing to remember, though, is like if we look back at that first video here, I show Xbox One X, right, which is a significantly more powerful machine than the Switch. That thing was still dropping down as low as 20 frames per second, right? It doesn't run well on older machines. And that's still kind of true here, but it's still very much in playable territory.
Okay.
It's kind of like in heavy areas, you're kind of mostly around 24 to 27 FPS. It can occasionally drop lower than that, but then some other areas can be close to 30. So it's kind of up and down, but it's never that smooth. But I don't think you were ever going to get this to a stable 30 FPS when you consider what the game is.
The game's vision, right? I would 100% based upon the fact that they're already using TAAU and scaling dynamically the resolution here. This is probably a, CPU limitation. It's not the first time we've seen an open world game on Switch running modern technology having trouble reaching 30 FPS in an open world scenario. In fact, it is so common on Switch. It's not surprising here. The game's basically a PC game running on Switch at this point, and it looks a lot better. So the fact that it looks so much better now, I think, actually makes this a much more justifiable performance profile than what we originally saw all those years ago, where it was running so awfully, including the stutters and things like that, while looking like easily 100 times worse in comparison to what you're seeing right now.
Yeah, this is true, though. There is one caveat. I did find when playing on certain online servers and these custom maps, the performance did tend to get pretty low in this version. And, of course, the visual quality also takes a step down. But I think that's just the nature of how this game works. Again, though, I'm really not the target audience for this game, and I'm not a huge fan of how Ark itself plays. But I guess I can kind of see the appeal to this thing.
It's also one of those games where I think if you do hit the co-op setting with this, I've played things like Terraria in the past, and like those kind of games, like where you're building up yourself over time and this little little nook of the world where you try and survive. As a co-op thing, it has its pluses, to say the least. But I know exactly what you're saying, because when I loaded this game up originally on PC, I was just like, it's like dark, and I've only got like poop and like a club in my inventory, and I couldn't like make fire. Like I don't even know, man. Yeah.
So that's actually a cool thing, though. It's a little annoying for capture, but so this game has very dark nights, especially in that first map, right? Which is kind of a little more realistic.
Yeah, we've talked about this before. Where like video games, for the sake of being cool and the fact that you want players to see things, they usually make nighttime like very blue. And it honestly, unless you're getting a full moon outside or near a city, it's actually night is extremely dark.
Yeah, that's the thing. If you're actually out in an area with no electric lights, it's very dark when the moon is not out. And that's kind of what Ark tries to simulate here. So I can actually really respect that, because they try to make night a terrifying thing.
That's cool. Yeah.
Where you have to survive out there, and there's still enemies around, and you just gotta do what you gotta do. So that part is cool. And honestly, it does now seem like this is a good way to play the game. What I need to check on, though, there do seem to be some physical copies that already exist that might have preserved the old port. And I've heard, though, that they're going to be releasing a new retail version of Ark with this Ultimate Survivor Edition. So it sounds like in the end we may actually get access to the OG and the new one. For this video, I actually tried to find a cartridge locally, and all the versions on store shelves were the download-only versions, which I thought was really strange. So there's a retail card, but there's also a retail version that doesn't have a card, it seems. Unfortunately.
Okay, so John, what would you say overall about this this new porting effort?
It's one of the more transformative changes I've ever seen. And the fact that it's essentially released as like a patch, it's pretty insane, because it takes the game from being an unplayable mess, one of the worst ports on Switch, and turns it into one of the more accomplished open world games on Switch, especially for Unreal. I mean, there's a lot of other games that have attempted large scale on Switch using Unreal Engine.
Yes, my goodness.
Like the Outer Worlds, if you remember that. It was, I mean, they've improved that somewhat since then, but it was still really bad, right? Compared to that, even, I would say this is a significant improvement. And honestly, not the worst way to play the game, especially if you're in handheld mode. It looks shockingly good. So, Grove Street Games, you guys did a fantastic job on this port. It really is transformative, and I think fans of Ark will be very happy with this, especially considering that it's just a free upgrade.
Yeah.
Yes, it's years later after it already released, but they've made good on this and really created something that I think they can be proud of.
Yeah, we do love a good turnaround story here, because covering a game in a negative fashion on DF is something that we actually do not like doing. We like being positive.
No,
we're pretty positive.
Exactly. It's fun to crack those jokes, but in the end, I would rather make a positive video. But when things go bad, we've got to share the reality of it, and that was the reality of Ark on Switch, and thankfully, it is no more.
Yeah,
but
great.
That's going to do it for this video, so thanks for joining me, Alex.
As always, John, I loved it.
And hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Be sure to let us know if you did, and we'll see you next time.